Because if you were told, these are your values because they were the church's or the community's values, it can be really hard for people once they know they don't quite believe that stuff anymore, but they don't know what they do believe.
Hmm.
And that can be a really hard place to act from when you don't have your values like.
All right, y'all. I'm here with Erica, and I'm so excited to jump in. Thanks for joining us today, Erica.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too. So, we have had episodes in the past talking about relationships. We have not had the sex talk here on the show.
Hmm.
So, I'm excited to bring this conversation, but I think it's going to go well. At this point, by the time this goes out, it would have been a few weeks before we had a couples coaches, they're plural. Anyway, talking about relationships and all that. So I think this goes good along the same lines. I love the perspective that you take on the sex conversation, which is why I invited you on the show. And I think that this topic affects so many couples' sex lives in such unconscious ways. And I just think it's such an important conversation to bring to light. So, first of all, let's just start like at the beginning.
Yeah,
Can
sure.
you just give us the rundown? And I'd love to hear kind of if you want to weave in kind of how you got into this. I'm sure you have your own
Hmm.
story to share to weave into this. But what is purity culture and kind of what brought you into this line of work that this is kind of your main focus?
Yeah, so lots of good, deep questions to dive right into here. When I talk about purity culture, I have a few ways that I describe it. The first is that purity culture is a system of control regarding our gender and sexuality that is strongly enforced on people that prizes the virginity of women and sort of teaches women that they are responsible for the sexual desire and lust of others. And I think that there's a broad definition that sort of purity culture can be seen in all major world religions, but here in America, we associate it mostly with evangelical Christianity or even more fundamentalist Christianity. And that is because purity culture had a surge of popularity. It was a very intentional movement in the 1990s and early 2000s that came with an industry of purity rings and purity pledges and purity balls and books about how to, have a biblical sexual ethic. The book I Kissed Dating Goodbye is one of the best known examples of a purity culture book. So that is a general definition. And then the more kind of concentrated how it applies to people in the United States. And my relationship with the topic is I actually did not grow up in purity culture. It is often assumed that because I talk about it and focus on it so much that I must have experienced it myself. But I had quite a different experience. I have been a sex educator since my college days, and I'm now in my mid 40s. So I've been working as a sex educator for nearly 25 years. And I have always had a very healthy relationship with sexuality, but observed the difficulties that a lack of information about sex was causing other people. So my work over the decades has been in various health clinics, hospitals, community-based organizations that were addressing the sexual health needs of people. And when I decided to start my own business, sex ed focused, I thought there are so many people out there who are adults that never received the sex education that they need. And by and large, they were adults coming out of purity culture. Now, millennials approaching middle age, just being like, I'm in my 30s or I'm even in my 40s, and I feel like my relationship to sexuality has been harmed by the way I was raised.
Mhm.
So that is how I came to do this work and focus on it. Was I just saw the need that people had. And I have observed over the years of my work that having real information about sex shared with you in a shame-free way can make a massive impact on people. So
Mhm.
that is that is kind of where my purity culture focus started.
Yeah, no, this is good. I would you and I love that you have I feel like because you didn't come from purity culture, you have kind of this two ways of looking at things. So I love that you can kind of bring those perspectives together. What do you see in your work? Because you've been doing this a long time. What do you
Mhm.
see as some of the most harmful effects of purity culture on people's relationship with sex? And then do you see that more on women versus men?
Yeah, this is such a good question. So, I don't think that purity culture, I don't think anyone who was raised with such shaming views about sexuality really gets out unscathed, regardless of gender.
Hmm.
I do see, and from all of the clients I've worked with, women and LGBT people are harmed the most, but men are also harmed by purity culture. By and large, the women I talk to feel a deep sense of shame about their sexuality and their bodies. They were taught that their bodies were tempting, their bodies were evil, anything that felt good must be sinful, that they had to be very, very careful about male attention.
Cover
That is,
up.
yeah, dress codes, modesty dress codes, not causing their brothers to stumble, like literally using that language. And so now it's really hard for a lot of the women I work with to even feel like their body can be a source of pleasure and
Mm,
to accept that sexual pleasure is enjoyable and good for them. I hear a lot from folks who did get married before ever having sex. And then once the wedding happened, they did not have the wonderful honeymoon and sex life that they were promised.
mhm.
The promise sort of being if you remain pure, if you do things by the book, when you get that ring on your finger, you will turn into the wife, that your husband is
Mhm.
is hot for, and it's going to be great, and
Mhm.
you're going to know what to do. And unfortunately, sex doesn't work that way. You need information.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I see and hear men struggling with is they were taught that their sexual urges and impulses were so harmful to other people and to keep a lid on their attractions, their desires. A lot of the men I work with said they were in accountability groups where they were told, like, masturbation is bad. And so some of them really, really struggle with how to express their attraction to women because they're so afraid that they are predators because they were
Right.
kind of raised to think of themselves as predatory. And
Mhm.
if women are raised to think of the men as predatory, this creates such a messed up dynamic
Mhm.
from the jump.
From the get-go. Yeah. Yeah. And I always think it's interesting. So I just for little context, I grew up in purity culture. Like I was a part of the whole true love waits thing and the purity rings and the whole thing. And I find it interesting. A friend and I were just having this conversation last month that we go from sex is bad, don't do it, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, to like, oh, you're married. Now have to become this like sex vixen. Like, like there's just a
Yeah.
switch you turn on, and all of a sudden it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I know. Like, that is wild to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because in order to have a good sex life, maybe if you just meet someone and the chemistry is good, you can wing it for a while.
Yeah.
But to have good sex requires having some fundamental knowledge about how your body works, how your partner's body works, and to know how to consent, how to receive consent, how to communicate, how to be a partner who is respectful and understanding of your own partner's boundaries and limits, and how to figure out what you like and what your limits are. And we do not equip young people with that information,
Right.
especially not young people in purity culture. The stories I hear are they range everywhere from run of the mill to super extreme, where folks are like, yeah, I wasn't even allowed to, read. I wasn't even allowed to read the dictionary because there were sex words in the
Mm,
dictionary. So,
hmm.
like, such a intentional effort to keep any mention of sexuality from young people, which results in then it seeming like the scariest thing in the
Right.
world.
Right. For sure. For sure. What do you think are the most important pieces? Because I know you are a big proponent of sex education. What do you think are the
Mhm.
most important pieces that should that have been that were missing or maybe still are missing that should be learned or taught and learned
Mhm.
going into having a healthy sexuality?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I like to do with clients or encourage them to do is develop their own personal set of ethics and values around sex. Because if you were told, these are your values because they were the church's or the community's values, it can be really hard for people once they know they don't quite believe that stuff anymore, but they don't know what they do believe.
Hmm.
And that can be a really hard place to act from when you don't have your values like clearly sort of stated, and then you can act in integrity with them. So I really encourage people to sit down and think like, do I believe that sex should only happen in marriage? Do I believe that a woman's value is tied to her virginity? Do I believe that, it's shameful to fantasize or masturbate? Like all of these questions I think are really important to just think for yourself about, which
Right.
can be really difficult. Obviously for folks sort of raised in religions where you weren't allowed to ask questions or have your own gut instinct, connecting with it can be difficult, but I think that's really important.
Hmm.
And then another really important piece is the sex education, and not just here's information about sex, but I like to work with people in a very targeted way where I ask them a lot of questions about their life and their experience and figure out where their gaps in knowledge are, and then give them information, but in a sensitive way, in a shame-free way, in a matter-of-fact way, and allow them the space to process about how that all makes them feel, and to be able to ask questions. Like there's no dumb questions about sex, no matter how old you are. And I know a lot of people feel embarrassed. They're
Right.
like, I'm a 35-year-old married woman and I still don't know. And then they'll ask me a question. And I'm like, it's okay that you don't know that. Like this was intentionally kept from you.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's such a huge takeaway because I talk about this all the time just in terms of women's bodies, period.
Hmm.
Like no pun intended, but like women don't understand how their periods work. Like a lot of us
Yes.
weren't taught that. We don't understand our hormonal cycle. We don't
Hmm.
understand just the natural hormonal rhythm and what happens. Like a lot of us were not taught that. And I think the same things with sex, whether you were in religion or not, a lot of us, we weren't given a manual, like, right? We weren't given
Yeah.
a manual. And I mean, I know the extent, I went to public school. The extent of my sex education was like, oh, you get your period and then you can get pregnant. Like there wasn't, sex
Hmm.
education was not really sex education. So I think
Yeah.
that's an important thing to note. Like it doesn't matter how old you are or even, what your life was like, religion or not. I think there are a lot of things that we just don't know because we don't know. We weren't taught.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the example you used of learning how your menstrual cycle works, that is so empowering because when you understand that, then you can prevent pregnancy more effectively. You can
100%.
predict your symptoms and your
Your
moods more
mood,
correctly.
exactly.
Like it is fascinating to be able to be like, "Oh wow, this is the week I'm ovulating and I am extra into my partner this week," and like
Yes,
know that that's
yes.
a thing.
100%. Well, and I had a gal come on a couple months ago, and she was talking. It was about carboxy but it was for vaginal health. And she was talking about how women get into menopause, and later in life they lose sensitivity down there, and
Mhm.
so sex isn't as pleasurable. And we had the conversation about that too. And you mentioned that a second ago, but the pleasure piece, I think there's so much shame tied
Yeah.
around the pleasure piece, especially in purity culture, but a lot of times just in a lot of society in general, and
Uh-huh.
especially with women. Like we got pills for men to get erections left and right, but when we talk about women's pleasure, it's like, oh wait, it's just for
Yeah.
men, like
Yeah.
this that the conversation is just hasn't quite, I feel like hasn't quite gone far enough to like, okay, women, both sexes are meant to have pleasure, right?
Yeah, and it's very, a lot of the women I have talked to said that they were never even taught that masturbation was wrong because it was assumed that girls wouldn't ever masturbate.
Mm-hmm.
And it was assumed that girls wouldn't fantasize and girls wouldn't quote unquote struggle with sexual thoughts and feelings.
Because it
So
was
when you
just
have,
guys.
yeah, it was just guys that
Mm-hmm.
do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Right.
So I have worked with more than one woman who said, I did not know what a clitoris was
Sure.
until I was well into my 20s. I
Totally.
didn't know that women did masturbate. I thought I was this lone outlier. I worked with a woman once who said, when I was a teenager, I used to wonder if maybe I was really a boy because I thought about sex. And she
Mm,
is not trans. She's not even remotely gender non-conforming, but she had no example of a woman being sexual, of a
right.
woman feeling desire and pleasure.
Yep. Yep, for sure. Well, and I think, going down a rabbit hole here, but I think there's so much generational trauma. And I mean, you look at, hundreds of years ago, like women, the only reason you had sex with women is for the men to get pleasure and to make babies. So I think for
Hmm.
generations, that's the only thing sex for a woman was equated to. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of generational healing. I think that's still left to be done for just that part, like untangling
Yeah.
that.
Yes, for sure. Part of what I love to help people understand is that America is a pretty repressed nation in terms of our attitudes towards sexuality,
Yeah.
and that in the wide world of humans, there are other examples of time periods, places, and cultures where female sexuality was not as suppressed or
Yes.
feared. And
Correct.
so I love for people to learn about, like, yeah, like they don't talk about women this way in this particular society, or women were, their pleasure is prioritized in this example. So the American sort of puritanical version of sex is one take on it.
Right. Right.
um yeah, but it can be really difficult for people to kind of come to terms with the fact that sex is such a natural, holistic part of our lives when you were taught that this is a very bad thing that you compartmentalize,
Yep.
except in marriage.
Yep.
And then then there are more roles after that. But
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think I do like that you said that, men and women both are affected by this. I think for women, and I'm speaking for myself, but I know I've talked to people and have friends that have the same experience. It's different for women because I feel like there's other things. There's so much more attached to the sex part. Like we were talking about, what girls are not supposed to make, our Christian brothers stumble, or it's
mhm.
all about like cover up your body. And I know for me and a lot of my friends, like that brought up a lot of body image issues
Oh
and
yeah.
lasted like well into, your 20s and 30s
Uh-huh.
of the shame and all that attached. So there's a lot attached to that part of it for women.
Yeah. When I get a new client, I usually ask them a lot of questions about their upbringing and the messaging they received about sex, and then if they can remember particular experiences where they were directly shamed or
Hmm.
corrected or something. And inevitably, so many women will say, "Oh yeah, I remember when I was just walking down the hallway in school wearing this new t-shirt and I got dress coded or whatever, got a dress code violation." And the shame that makes them feel is
Hmm.
like palpable talking about it 20 years
A hundred
later.
percent. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, you feel it. Like it that takes a lot for it to go away. And I think that I don't, I feel like a lot of times that part is lost, and a lot of us don't recognize like how much that really did affect us and how much, I mean, and I know like I have a daughter and she's 3, and I know my husband and I have these conversations all the time where it's like, even at 3, it's like being so mindful and intentional about what you say about her body and what she's wearing, because
Mhm.
the smallest thing, like you said, you're 30
We
years old, you're still
remember.
thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, I can remember like a boy making fun of me in a bathing suit when I was 11, and that was what,
Yes.
34 years ago.
My
Like that stuff
gosh.
stays. And
Yes.
I love that you are already mindful about the messaging your daughter receives. And it's not easy because there's you in your home, and then of course there's the outside world.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure. 100%. It's such a tricky balance. Well, how do you help? I mean, this is kind of a loaded question. So maybe you mentioned
Mhm.
just a few ways. But for people that you work with that are kind of on the path to, I'm using air quotes here, like healing from this part, right? From purity
Yeah.
culture or, whatever trauma is lingering. What are some ways you're helping them heal from that and shift things?
Hmm. So I think it's important to say that I'm not a therapist. I'm a sex educator, and my
Sure.
degree is I have a Master of Education degree. So I don't have a clinical degree.
Right.
There are times that I work with people where it's clear that my work in conjunction with therapy would be very helpful. And a lot of times people see me for the sex education support and coaching alongside a therapist.
Yeah.
Because, what I do is in a different lane and it is so specific where we're talking about sex and sex education and the things they're asking me questions that they're like, I would never ask this of anybody else. So I do, when I meet a client and I talk to them and I kind of figure out what they want, what their goals are and what they would like to achieve, then I'm able to really help them not just learn about those areas, but talk about the things that they feel the most shame about. And so
Mm,
many times, just having open conversations about sex with one person, me, does a lot to just start to dislodge the shame because
yes.
the shame it's growing in the silence of it.
Yep. Yep.
And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't talk about this stuff with my friends, or it's really hard for me to, I would never talk about this with my mom or whatever. So
Hmm.
just the process of sometimes sitting down and having intentional conversations about sex and giving themselves permission to engage with the topic goes a long way in the like the healing process.
Yeah.
But I tell everyone it is such a long game. um I wish that I could in 2 sessions, kind of we can chip away at the purity
Sure.
culture harm, but ultimately what I provide are the materials and the encouragement. And then it's a lot of it is information that people apply for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And, they will challenge these feelings when they come up, and you often don't know what's going to trigger them. But I like to set people up with the education and also like different tools and skills. And then sort of it's like you go and you apply them to your life as you see fit.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's the biggest, like, yes, therapy and, I'm sure there's, somatic practices and stuff that can be done to help with all that. But I think I think that's also an underestimated piece of healing anything, even if we're not talking about sex.
Mhm.
But just this space to talk, like
Yeah.
just this space to talk about it and get it out can be so cathartic and healing just to get it out and have a safe space
Mhm.
to, yeah, I think that's a big part of the healing.
Yeah. And part of my work involves I offer support groups for several different
Mm,
sort of niche topics under purity culture. One of the ones that I've been running for years is a support group for people who are LGBT and grew up in purity culture. It's called Purity Culture Dropout Queer Support Group. But this past fall, I also started a support group for people who are divorced after having been
mm,
raised in and married in purity culture. And now they're like, I'm divorced. This was supposedly the worst outcome. And now I don't know how to date, or I
yep,
don't have any experience of sex outside of this marriage that
right,
was, we were 20 and
right.
we didn't know anything.
Yep,
So,
yep. That I
yeah,
was there.
so
That was me. I got married at 22, completely dysfunctional. I mean, in many ways. But yeah, I mean, you don't.
mhm.
And then you divorce, then you find somebody else. You're like, well, now I don't even know what to
Yeah.
do.
Yes, yes. So that's a group support where like part of the healing is bringing people together who share that experience
Hmm.
because you could go to a divorce support group, but you might have to explain your religious
Yep.
upbringing to others.
Yeah.
Or you could go to a support group at your church, but you're not going to be able to say all the things that you want to say.
Right.
So it's been really powerful having a group of people together who are like, wow, you know what I'm talking about
Hmm.
without me having to explain my
Hmm.
church or
Yeah.
explain, the things my youth pastor said that messed me up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's huge. That's huge having that space. I love that. And I love that you have so many different niche resources because it does help to have that insight from like your specific experience and point of view. I mean, I think that's
Mhm.
that's a huge benefit. Yeah, I love that. Okay, I have one more question I want to ask you as we
Sure.
start to wrap up here. Because I love this conversation, and I think yes, the therapy and stuff I think is helpful, but I think the education piece, like the work that you're doing, I think is just so foundational for the healing process. Like you can do
Hmm.
therapy stuff is fine, but I think that just the work that you're offering really does give people the foundation to, like you're saying, like take this with you and go. So I just love this
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank
Okay,
you.
yes, of course. Before I ask you this last question, I'd like to ask everybody, where can everybody find out more about you and like the support you offer, these support groups you're talking about, all of that good stuff?
Hmm. So my website is purityculturedropout.com. Pretty easy to remember. And then you can find the bulk of my kind of the hub of my work. I have an Instagram account, and my Instagram name is Erica Smith Educates.
Perfect.
So it used to be Erica Smith Sex Ed, but sometimes the Instagram censors didn't
Yes,
like
the sex,
that.
the sex word.
Yeah, the sex word, which is ridiculous. But on other social media platforms, I'm Erica Smith Sex Ed. On
Okay,
Instagram, I'm Erica Smith Educates.
perfect. And of course, I'll have links to that in the show notes. So y'all can go check that out and give Erica a follow and learn. I love your content on Stream. It's so good.
Thank
Okay,
you.
okay. The last question I want to ask you that I like to ask everybody, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
Oh, this is a great question.
Hmm.
Hmm. Like really, really connect with who you are and what you want outside of the expectations put on you by other people.
Mm.
And I know this is a lot for everyone, but I feel like it's a lot, especially for women. We are all raised with this idea of what we are going to be as women. And a lot of times it's mother, wife, etc. And not everybody feels deeply connected to that. Not everyone wants to do the traditional expectations regardless of what age you are, or all of that. I think
Yep.
the best way to live with purpose is to really, really allow yourself to ask the question, like, what do I actually want? And once you've identified that, that's your purpose.
I love that. That's so good. That, I mean, I think that's great advice for any area. I love that. Like outside of other expectations and
Yeah.
society, family norms, all of that. That's a big, a big scary step for a lot of people to step outside of that.
Yes, for sure.
So yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing your insight on this. I love this conversation. And y'all
Yeah.
check out the show notes and go check out. And if you need support for any of the things that we were talking about, go check out her website and find those support groups. And thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you, Hope. Thanks for having me.